We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start by having you just all pat yourselves on the back for moving to the front and the middle. And we're going to get this morning going with a game to begin, because we need to get our energies up. This is not the same setting as yesterday. I know it feels the same, it looks the same, but it's not. We need to have a little bit more energy if we can towards collaboration. We need to have a little bit more openness to talk if you want, because I very much wish we could be in a smaller space, more intimate together, so we're gonna just have to pretend a little bit. So to get us going, I'm gonna ask everybody to get up, and we're going to play a game that's called Rock, Paper, Scissors, Snake. And the way you play it is very simple. You're gonna find someone, you're gonna do rock, paper, scissors, and the loser is going to become that person's little snake tail. And they're gonna follow them around and cheer for them. And we're gonna see who our champion is gonna be by the end. So you're gonna keep looking for someone to play against until you lose, then you'll become their snake tail, and I promise, if you don't like games, like this will be over fast. Like it sounds slow with this many people, but it's actually very fast, like 90 seconds. So we're gonna stand up, find someone to play rock, paper, scissors with. By the way, it's rock, paper, scissors, and then shoot. Okay, are we down to our last two? Raise your hand if you're still in. One person. Okay, two. Okay, so come on down to the very middle here. Yeah. All right, and what is your name?
Lindsey.
Mitzi?
Yep.
Okay, and what is your name? Sorry, I couldn't hear. Todd? Ty. T-Y. Ty. Okay. Cheer for your person. All right. The champion gets all the marbles, all of our excitement and success for that. Okay, we're gonna dive in, and we're gonna bring that same excitement to small group instruction. Yes, woo! Feel free to cheer, feel free to get up and dance, whatever, the moves you. We don't have an official break like yesterday, but we will take probably 2 breaks throughout the time together. And of course, please remember that, you're an adult, you do what you need to do. Bathrooms are that way. I think there's probably still water and coffee in the main room. So whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, please do that. So we're gonna jump in to our making small groups work. And today what we're gonna be talking about is really trying to build off our conversation from yesterday and take it beyond just kind of some of these really big ideas that we discussed. We're gonna orient towards the book and the learning pathway, because this is the launch of that pathway. I don't actually know if you being here means you have to do the pathway, so if you're wondering that, you need to ask someone else. And then we're gonna focus on the data and talk some about crafting coaching cycles and dive into some routines. We're gonna kind of see how this flows throughout. So, this session is going to include some of revisiting yesterday, a little bit more about chapters 1 and 2, and some coaching and routines. And my hope is that this really brings clarity, but really the only way this is going to bring clarity is if you are talking to me and asking your questions, giving me your comments, all that sort of thing, so that we can make sure that we're getting your questions answered. So to that end, we're just going to start by checking in. So say hi to the people near you. I hope that some of you are sitting with someone new. If you're all alone, I would highly encourage you to move, because there's gonna be a lot of times where I tell you to talk to somebody. If you're someone who just really prefers to process by themselves, I get it, but it's gonna be a lot of time where you maybe won't have someone to chat with. And I want you to think about, what are you still thinking about yesterday? I hope that some of you went to sleep, and as you're falling asleep, your brain was like, small group instruction. That's what happens in my brain. So, of course, it should happen in yours. And then let's think about anything that we might need to clarify. So if you want to go ahead and start chatting with those around you, jotting down your thoughts, and then we'll come back together in just a little bit. Okay, let's pull back together. All right, if you hopefully got some ideas going, got some questions going, we want to go ahead and collect those. So I want you to grab your phone and you can scan one of these QR codes, or you can go to menti.com and then type in this code. And there's just going to be one question that pops up. What is the most pressing question that you have about small group right now? And I want to just grab all of those questions and thoughts that you just generated so we make sure we don't lose them. So just take a moment and put in your question or comment. You don't have to put in multiple, but if you want to, you can. It's anonymous. There's literally no way for me to tell who's saying what. So go ahead and put in your most crazy, controversial question. Okay, we have a lot of great questions coming in, and if you're with us virtually, please do also throw your questions in. So many questions about scheduling, timing, flexibility. Absolutely, okay. So we're going to try to answer as many of these throughout the day as we can, and hopefully get some really helpful things going. But I want to just pause and see if there's any questions that are so pressing that you want to go ahead and ask them right now. So we do have a mic runner who can come to you with a mic. So does anyone have a question that they want to ask right now? Something, oh, yep, perfect. Okay, can we get a mic up here to the front? For me, it's the right. I don't know stage direction, sorry. I was never in theater.
I'm coming.
I think that's the left though, right? Stage left? Okay. I was gonna say, I think it's just opposite, but it sounds more complicated than it seems like it needs to be.
Don't be sorry.
Okay.
Hi, I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I think when it comes to 4th and 5th grade, they can be real specific. And I'm kind of wondering what this could look like in 4th and 5th grade classes who maybe don't already pull small groups.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so we can talk about that a little bit, for sure. I don't necessarily know if we're gonna get deeply into that in the in the slides that I have, but I'm glad you brought that up because if that's a question on people's mind, let's discuss. First things first is acknowledging that this might be something that teachers have never done in those grade levels, and that it's not necessarily the case that everybody in 4th and 5th grade really needs a small group to succeed. So thinking about how we can make sure that 4th and 5th grade teachers are prepared to teach small groups around phonics, multisyllabic word decoding, fluency, and when needed in that reading comprehension area, I would start by saying, let's make sure everybody is fluent. Let's make sure everybody has all of these decoding skills solidified, and can we lean into supporting those in a smaller group? Yep, they're probably getting intervention. We may have noticed this kid before, but maybe not. And thinking about how we might kind of start the process with those children with the highest needs in those classrooms. Alternatively, if you have a really high achieving population, you don't have a lot of kids who need that kind of support in 4th and 5th grade, thinking about how we can use this as a quick extension of the whole classwork. You notice a group of kids struggling in this particular text. How could we use a small group to deepen their comprehension with some really specific support and strategies? So that's just a few kind of like big thoughts, but some of that hopefully will come throughout the day. Anyone else? Yeah, one more over here on stage right.
Good thing I wear my running shoes today.
Thank you so much for running around.
Hey, I need it. It's been a long week. Here we go.
Okay, so my question is about formal and informal assessment
Okay.
and how often. Okay, so I'm very fortunate that our program, our ELA program, has assessments throughout, like almost for K2,
Yep.
like every Friday.
Great.
So then they can group informally really easy. And as I was looking at your steps of assessment, which I'm sure you're going to talk about, that is a lot of that goes into what we use for benchmarking. So how often do you, like, which is more important, the informal of what you see on the weekly assessment or grouping kids by benchmark?
I think we're going to get to that.
Okay, never mind.
But
Just
if
wait,
we
I'm jumping the
don't-
gun.
If we don't, let me know. Please,
Okay,
interrupt.
thanks.
Okay, so with that, we're going to jump back in, and throughout the morning, I'm going to be checking that Mentimeter for the questions that are coming up. I'm going to probably sort them so that I can see what is coming up most often, because there are 178 responses. So, and I am a quick reader, but I don't know if I'm that fast. And then we'll make sure that we'll get as many of those answered as we can, particularly across the whole learning pathway. So just a quick couple of reminders. You do have the packet, hopefully from yesterday, the booklet. If you don't have that, it's okay. But if you do, you could still use the pages from yesterday for writing little notes. We also have this packet. It's just 3 sheets, but that will help us as we go today. If you didn't get one, there's extras right here in front of me. And so you can come up and grab one. As you can see on the screen, you will not be in the video feed if you have to do that, so don't worry about checking your hair. Okay, so the second thing is that we have a Padlet that I would like you to just go ahead and go open your computer or phone and log into now so that you don't lose it. We will also, I'm sure, be able to send this out via email. But this is going to have resources for the book and for planning small group instruction. So you follow that link at the top, padlet.com/reading-research-resource/MESA small groups, and then you put in the password SGBR, small groups, big results. I checked. It works. People are always telling me my links don't work. This one, I checked. So, well, that's not the prettiest. Let's hope that doesn't happen to all the slides. Huh. Okay. Well, we're going to find out if the internet is not supporting those things. That's going to be an interesting day.
Can you put the slide?
Yeah, I think he's probably resetting the slideshow. So, padlet.com/reading-research-resource/MESA small groups. If you want to try your hand at freeform. There we go. Okay, so put it in your computer, put it on your phone, put it somewhere. And then you don't actually need that right now, but we'll give you some time later to look in there and see what's up. All right, just about 30 more seconds to make sure everybody can get in. And then you can put your computer away, or if you need to keep it out for note-taking, I understand. But generally, you won't probably need it for a little bit here. You can put it away if you want. Okay, so this year, one of your options for learning pathways is going to be related to the book, Small Groups, Big Results, and is going to build off of the things we talked about yesterday and the things we talked about today. So I'm going to start just by introducing you a little bit more to the learning pathway and to the book. So we get a little behind the scenes info here. So first off, what is this book and what it isn't? Well, first things first. This is a short book. It's 160 pages. That's what Scholastic says the books in this series are. That's like a very firm rule. They have to be 160 pages on the dot. If you have multiple books from this series, you can check. They're all the exact same length. I guess it looks good together. I don't know otherwise why that is necessary. So it doesn't have every single thing that could ever happen in a small group in this book. It's also written by a very specific person, me, and I have a particular expertise and a particular viewpoint on things like anyone would. And those of you who have known my work for a little bit know that a lot of that is towards the importance of decoding and ensuring that all children can read words. So someone who was different from me might have written the book differently, even if they were referencing the same research. So this book is not the only vision of how small group instruction can proceed in a way that is smart, efficient, or effective, but I hope that it gives you a vision. And for some of you, that might be the one you want to take on, and for others, that might be integrated with other things that you know and do in small group that you don't want to lose. And I'm just here to tell you that's okay. You also might use some of the routines in the book as inspiration for additional things that might happen. The things in the book, I'm very serious about following empirical research. That's like probably my core value, if you will. So every routine in the book is referencing direct research, and quite a lot of it. And most of the activities I describe are also things that have appeared in specific research studies. And don't tell any of the other people who presented here yesterday this, but the secret is researchers are kind of the worst at coming up with cool activities for kids. Teachers are much, much better. So researchers typically are going to come up with kind of like the driest option for an activity. So for example, there was a pretty famous study on phonics that like had really remarkable results, and I was reading it a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, well, what did they do? What did they do in these phonics lessons? Finally get to the section where they describe this. Often in research studies, this is like 2 sentences long, and it was like, and then we just gave kids a word list, and we said, read the words. And I was like, okay, you did that every day for 20 minutes. And I was like, well, that is one way to do this. I'm not sure if these kids are being compensated or something, but that is probably not going to play out well in the classroom. So you should use these as sources of inspiration and understanding what is happening in this routine, what's the goal, what's going on here, and use that as kind of your jumping off point. The book is organized into 2 parts. So there's the first 3 chapters, which I would consider like the introductory material. The why, the kind of understanding of small groups, how do we identify needs and assessments, and some big Q&As. And then the rest of the chapters are those routine chapters. So this is the how. This is how do you target a need all the way from the alphabet through comprehension. And it does have these 21 evidence-based routines. So each of those routines is going to follow a very similar format. They all look and feel the same. And I intentionally wrote these so that they would be things that you could sit and read through, but that they also could just serve as reference material. So that you could use this book by saying to teachers, like, we're going to just look at this one routine. And actually, my absolute favorite things that people say to me is when somebody comes up to me and they say, I had the craziest experience with the book. I picked it up. I was flipping through. I saw something I thought was interesting, and I read it, and then I did it the very next day. Someone actually came up to me right when the book came out and said that they had done that, and then the next day their principal happened to just walk in and decide to observe them. And then they were like, oh, that was such a great routine, I'm going to buy the book for everybody. And I was like, wow, that must have felt so good that you were doing something for the very first time, and it was that's important to the people who are watching you. So it's designed so that teachers can try stuff out pretty fast. The way that the routines work is that the first part is kind of talking about what we know from research. So, what problem is this solving? Why would we use this? What kinds of kids are we talking about? Then we talk about what the research says about this particular area, and you'll know that there's a lot of references in this, that each of these is basically its own little review of research. And then there's the actual routine. So always the same steps: review, teach, practice, and apply. Sometimes there's more apply, sometimes there's more practice, sometimes those two are combined. But you'll go through these same steps. This has some example teacher language, and it talks through sometimes things like how many practice opportunities, if that is something we know from research, or what kinds of text to apply in. Then there's always a whole section on prompting and giving feedback. And then the final part is about progress monitoring and moving on, helping teachers answer this question of, well, what does this look like when it's more than one lesson? How do I know kids have mastered this? How do I make this more rigorous or less rigorous? So that's kind of what you're going to see across all of these routines. One important thing to note is that I do make this distinction in the book between practice and application. Practice I use to mean we're doing this targeted skill in a pretty isolated context, like we're doing a word chain. Chat to cat to cap. Application meaning we're doing it in context. So then you're not just reading these words in isolation, you're reading about the cat who caught a fish. Well, that would be a pretty hard decodable word, but you get my drift, in a decodable text or something of that nature. And then every chapter ends with a swap. These ones are a little bit more philosophical than reading above the fray for those of you that love the swap model, but hopefully help people kind of think about how am I changing my instruction. So for example, in the earliest chapters with the swaps, chapter 4, less wait and see, more targeted practice right away. Understanding that when we see something going on in these early moments of alphabet and phonemic awareness, let's do something right away, because we can actually prevent reading difficulties from ever occurring if we just use a little bit more targeted instruction. So for us, across this year, we're gonna start with a keynote. Hopefully you were there. Talk about big ideas. That was off a lot of stuff from chapters 1 through 3. We got a little into instruction. Today, we're gonna get a bit deeper into how to get things started, logistics, some of the data, and we'll talk a bit about coaching and routines. But then the virtual sessions are where we're gonna really dive into those routine chapters and coaching around those specific things. I do recommend that you go ahead and read chapter 1 to 3, like on your own sometime. Soonish probably is reasonable. I don't think it would be like that long to read. Then you're going to want to read before the sessions, ideally, because then you'll come into the session with more questions and more clarity around what it is that you really want to know more about with these routines. So 4 and 5 before the first session, 6 and 7 before the second, and chapter 8 before the last session. So how are we going to use these first chapters? Well, chapter 1 is going to be all about that big conversation we had yesterday. What is the purpose of small group? How might my thinking change? And if you haven't already, I would recommend finding a friend, a coach friend, or a teacher friend, and just chatting about this a little bit, talking about what this means to you. Chapter 2 is all about data. So really using this as a time to give yourself some thinking time about what is it that my school is already assessing, what assessments do we already use, what do we need? Are there places where I might have to help a teacher supplement in really specific ways? And then chapter 3 is like basically just 10 Q&As. So reading those Q&As that are most relevant to you. And if you need to, chapter 3 is a good place to start a conversation with administration. The 10th question is specifically written like for principals. So thinking about if you're in a situation where you're trying to galvanize excitement and change around small group instruction, is that maybe a page that you could share and get a conversation started? And when we're using this book with teachers, again, if you want to share the book with teachers directly, You might do things like starting a conversation around chapter 1, asking, what does this make us think about small group instruction and its purpose? You do not need to have every teacher in your school read the whole book. I know that sounds weird coming from somebody who wants people to read the book, but you really don't have to. Only certain chapters are going to be most relevant for certain teachers, and for some people, reading through a whole book like that might not be like that useful. It might feel kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff in the book because I needed to go all the way from these teeny tiny alphabet skills all the way up through how do you make an inference in a complex text. So that's a lot. So they don't need to read the whole thing. You could flip to an individual chapter or just a routine that you want them to read about. And then finally, try something. We want to focus on implementing, not just kind of like read the whole book and then let's talk about it, but really thinking about how can we try some stuff out. So I'll just pause quickly here. Are there any comments or questions about the book? If you've already read the book, is there anything you want to share with colleagues before we get diving back into our kind of content for the day? You can wave at me if you have something to say or a question to ask.
There is a question in the chat about an article you mentioned and where they might be able to find it. So it says, is the article about supporting forming letters legibly linked somewhere, or could we maybe get it on the Padlet if it's not a protected article?
Is it something referenced just in the book, I'm guessing? Because I don't think I said, did I say anything about letters today? I don't think so.
Okay. I don't know. I'll clarify.
It was an example routine. Okay, got it. Yes, so all of the references in the book, at the very end of the book, there's a massive reference list with hundreds and hundreds of references, I think. So you can find the reference based on the author's name, and then you can Google that. I don't have off the top of my head what is or isn't open access, unfortunately, but that would be like probably the best way to find that. Anything else? Okay, we're going to start, well, we've already started. We're going to continue with a little review of yesterday, talking about defining small group instruction. Depending on who you are, we may or may not have spent a pretty good amount of time thinking about this, but I want to make sure that we kind of coalesce around some of the key things we talked about yesterday. First things first, this key idea of small group instruction being a tool, not a time of day. And thinking about how this allows us to change our perspective on what this thing is, how it might allow us to see it as more possible than trying to figure out all the time about how do I fill this thing up, what am I supposed to do, all of these kind of stressful thoughts that might come to teachers. So thinking about how we could introduce this concept with the quiet but clear acknowledgement that there is a level of impracticality in this, because we know that for the most part, we will need a time to do this, or it's not going to happen, but rather that we can change our thinking about how we're leveraging this. We talked about what is a small group and that it's really only a description of group size, that we really want to be thinking about 5 kids or so in general ed and 3 or so in an intervention setting, and that our biggest concern should be, what are we going to get out of this? Why would I meet with a smaller group of kids and not just meeting with small groups because it's what we do, or because it's on the schedule, or because somebody somewhere told you that that's how education needs to proceed, but rather thinking through what's the cost and what's the benefit of meeting with a smaller group. And we talked about how some of the big benefits are things like this ease with data. It helps us respond to data much more specifically. This ease with instruction and response, allowing us to be a lot more targeted and intentional and precise, and actually give kids the feedback and opportunities to practice that they really need. And finally, we discussed the motivation aspect of small group instruction and acknowledging that kids, they like it for the most part. So we talked about data a bit And we're going to dive into data more today. But thinking about how smaller groups help us respond to data in these specific skill areas. And they help us kind of triage who needs more support and how are we going to get them to that next step, as well as help us identify the intensity needed. A child who is 2 grade levels behind needs more intensity than just a classroom teacher. But a child who is just getting confused by the last couple of weeks of instruction, well, we can probably address that before it ever turns into a real problem. And we can address that through our teaching in smaller groups with precision and tons of feedback. And we know from research studies that teaching has the greatest impact when the content and amount of instruction are targeted to kids' needs. And we see this in some very interesting studies as well as those that are listed below, but this is actually not a study that I have down below, but looking at something we call individualized instruction. And researchers found that when kids were exposed to just the right amount of phonics instruction versus meaning-making instruction, and when that was happening in the right settings, was it small group, whole group, or even not with a teacher, that we had the best impact on young children. So thinking about how this kind of recipe of experiences that kids need to have that are targeted to where they're at can actually make a really big difference. We also talked about our 4 key elements. Is it targeted? We want to actually get to that need. Why are we here? We're not going to do an everything lesson. Is it data-based? Do we know why? Sometimes it will be okay if a teacher says, well, yesterday these kids couldn't do X, but most of the time we want that to be a firmer data point. Is it focused on practice? Do I come in and watch this lesson and I see bam, 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 the kids are practicing? And is it connected? And I want to just say one more thing about that idea of connection. I referenced this yesterday and I wanted to just bring it up straight to you so you could see it. There's been a couple studies on this, but one that I think is particularly interesting, where researchers were controlling the experiences that kids were having in vocabulary and comprehension in whole class and in small group. And they were ensuring that they were getting the same content, the same language, the same strategies, the same supports. And they noticed that they made much greater gains in comprehension. So when we have this alignment where everything is flowing together, kids do better. So we really want to think about not this. Okay, small group, you're over here, the set time of day, this content area, we got to fill it up. We need its own scope and sequence. We need its own stuff. And instead think, all right, how can I use this to ensure that kids are getting practice with my support so that they have more access to my whole class content? So in this session, we're going to be focusing on the data, some aspects of routines and feedback, and the coaching moves that you might use to move teachers through these. And I also want to just quickly do a little bit of a comparison with Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, because I know that that can get murky. So first of all, let's focus on that idea of Tier 1. The biggest difference, all kids have access to this. That doesn't mean everyone's getting the same type or amount, but you don't have to qualify for a Tier 1 small group experience. Second, it's best when it's deeply connected to whole classwork. When we have these connection points at a minimum via teacher language being the same, and at a maximum having real deep connections to the content. And we know that this is not going to be enough support for kids with many, many needs. In pretty much any circumstance, they're going to need more than what we can give them in just a Tier 1 small group. On the other side, when we think about intervention supports, we know that that's generally going to be part of a much more systematic response, where we have more formalized data, and we might have a more clear path for every single moment in the small group that a teacher in a general ed classroom might not need. We are focused on increasing the intensity at that point of need, giving more dosage, which means more time, more support, more explicitness, and more practice. It's likely going to take longer to make a big impact. It's bigger needs. Oftentimes, you can kind of think about this as, well, in tier 1, often what we're doing is we're trying to keep kids on grade level, and in other intervention settings, we're going to accelerate them back to grade level. And intervention could look very, very different depending on district. I work with districts across the US and Canada, and I have never been in a district that has the same intervention setup as a district beside them. And yes, sometimes I literally work in neighboring districts. Districts in the same ISD do not have the same intervention programs. I've worked in several ISDs in Michigan with districts that are like across the street from each other, and they look different. So it's hard to do too much generalization about what intervention looks like because it's really not possible for me to say. Now, what about both? Both of these need to be based on data, based on needs. Both of them need to be explicit. Both of them need to be aiming towards the same goals for readers. Unless a child has an IEP or some other explicit and clear reason why we're not aiming for them to be a grade level reader, we need them to be a grade level reader. And they all are going to use coherent instructional language and routines when possible so that we have that through line between experiences so that the kids with the most chaos in their reading lives are getting the most coherence from us as adults. So what are we going to use our small groups for? Like we said yesterday, we're going to use it for this place of targeted practice with more opportunities for direct, immediate feedback and a place to solve challenges where we see, oh, something is going awry here. Let's fix it before a problem actually occurs. So I want you to just take a moment to chat with those people around you. Is anything new coming up for you today? Is there anything that's kind of solidifying for you as we talk about what is going on in the small group instructional space? Or are there any new questions that have come up? And if you're in the virtual setting, we can go ahead and have some breakout room time. Okay, let's come back together. Are there any new ideas that came up that anyone wants to share with the group? Any comments? Yes.
I was just going to say we really appreciated you differentiating between practice and application. Often
Oh, sure.
our teachers are really into practice,
Yes.
and the application.
Yeah, so we said helpful to hear the difference between practice and application and to make that clear so that we're not just practice. Yes, which as we know, that's one of the things that's in the playbook, but also just in good practice. Like we got to get kids into text, both reading and also spelling. Anything else that came up? Okay, I'm going to turn this off so I don't scare anybody. Look at the time. Okay, it's 9:34. We're just going to take a quick 10-minute break until 9:45, just to get up, move around. I also would love to invite you to look at anything in the book that's intriguing to you. Hopefully you have it, or on that Padlet, which I'm going to throw the password back up in just 1 second. Or chat with somebody near you, whatever it is that you might need to do. If you want to grab a new cup of coffee, and then we'll come back together in just 10 minutes. So we're going to be going, that section that we just did is kind of like chapter 1, right? That's like what we start the conversation with small group. If you're working with teachers and you want to get into that kind of style of things, if they need that because they've used different types of small groups before, or you're trying to explain why we're doing this, that's kind of where you might want to start. But for some teachers, especially if they're just kind of like gung-ho for everything, and they're newer or they don't have a lot of ideas running through their mind about small group, you might just start kind of right away with data and instruction. So this is content that is mostly connected to chapter 2. So let's start with some honesty here. I kind of hate talking about data because I'm never going to get you exactly what you need. And I know that in a room this big, we're just never going to get there with the ultra specifics that you might actually need in reality. So I'm going to try to give you enough of some frameworks and examples that it's helpful for you in your specific space. But data conversations are really about the data we're actually looking at, and I don't know what data you're all looking at. So please do ask your questions. Please stop me and say like, okay, but what about this circumstance or whatever you might need. I wish that I had a magic wand that would make that conversation clearer and easier. But there's always going to be little weirdnesses about the specific data that you have. So again, we start by thinking about which needs might we target. This part should be pretty straightforward because you should have screening assessment data that helps you and teachers understand this. It's also highly related to grade level. So if you are working with kindergartners, you're probably going to be thinking about phonemic awareness and letter sound knowledge. If you're working with first and second graders, we're probably thinking about decoding, maybe into fluency. Third graders, we're in that fluency and multisyllabic word decoding. And then fourth and fifth, we're up towards fluency and reading comprehension. Now, could there be variation? 100%. But in general, this is kind of where we might be thinking. I do recommend you triage support around word recognition first. And that's because of a couple things. Number one, as you see on the screen, and I know I've talked to y'all before about this, we know that if you cannot recognize words, you cannot engage in reading comprehension, period, end of sentence. There is no way around that. You have to be able to decode. Number two, we know that decoding is a constrained skill. In other words, it hits a ceiling. You can, in fact, master it. And some people would argue that actually you cannot ever master comprehension because you could always grow in your understanding of language, new complex texts. Like when I went to grad school, I remember, having to read scientific articles for the first time, like it was like learning a new genre. So yes, you can continue to learn new genres throughout your life. So it's a lot harder to say like, hey, we've done it. You're good. Obviously, aspects of word recognition continue to grow. You continue to be able to interact with more and more complex morphemes and longer words, but we can get kids to a mastery point. So when we're talking about a constrained skill like that, it's easier to assess, it's easier to move, it's a quicker win for teachers, even though I know sometimes it feels extremely hard. So those are some reasons why I would recommend that. And the last one is because, like I said yesterday, there's just a little bit more research that clarifies how good small groups are for decoding that is not quite there for some of these other aspects of literacy. So then after you have that screening data and you kind of know, okay, in this classroom, most kids are kind of in this arena. They're doing alphabet and phonemic awareness. Then you're going to layer in this more usable type of data. And by that, we mean data that we are going to move beyond this green, yellow, red paradigm, where we can really say, what am I targeting? What is it that these kids need to work on in a more precise way? So look at these two examples. We have 4 kids in red, quote unquote, on Dibble's nonsense word fluency. If you're not familiar with that, it's a nonsense word list that would be a proxy for saying kids' decoding skills. Teacher 1 looks at these 4 kids and puts them in a group together focused on CVC word reading, noticing that those are the types of nonsense words that were on the assessment. Teacher 2 assesses each child with a decoding inventory, so something like the informal decoding inventory, core phonics, quick phonics, U-Fly placement test that tells them where their decoding skills are at on a scope and sequence. She notices actually 2 of these kiddos can't blend. 1. 2 are working on short vowels and 1 is actually up dealing with that 4th sound. So she's going to put them in separate groups. So what is different? Chatting with those around you or throwing your answer into the chat if you're virtual, what would be different about what occurs in these classrooms? Thinking about instruction, thinking about precision, thinking about speed of supporting kids' skills. Okay, let's come back together. If you can't find me and you like to see, I'm in the middle of the room. Okay, I heard a couple things coming up about this idea of, okay, teacher 2, man, that's a lot more intense. That's taking more energy and time from her. Teacher 1 seems kind of more realistic in a lot of situations. Teacher 1, well, maybe she doesn't have any other kids that would be grouped with those kids. Like, that's what we've got. So doesn't that make the most sense? What other thoughts came up for you thinking about what might be different in those 2 classrooms? And we have the mic that will come to you. Yes, over here. I'm making sure Shelly gets her workout today.
Thank you. If you'll stand, though, it's easier for the...
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll stand up. I was just saying, I don't think they realize that it actually can save them time because in the CVC, they're going to like have a 15 or 20 minute group and they're going to have their little whatever. But in the other one, like there's one kid that, I don't know, was struggling with short vowels. I can pull that kid at a 3 or 4 minutes, just so I have an extra time. Oh, I'm going to pull you. We're going to and hit it hard, maybe a few days in a row, and then come back and try and do it. Like it's not, like you said, it's a tool. And I don't think that they think about it like that. They think, okay, I need to put them in my small group, and it's 15 minutes every day, and it doesn't have to be like that.
I love that example. And yes, I think it's so important that we help teachers think about, are there times when a small group experience is going to feel more like an activity than like a full-blown lesson? Are there times when it's okay if you pull a small group and you don't say, how was everybody's weekend? And you don't have like a little chit-chat to start with. Should you do that sometimes? Of course, you're human, and so are they. But maybe sometimes it's just that you're grabbing a group and you're doing a very quick blending activity that is targeted towards exactly what they need. Now, with both of these classrooms, neither one of these is a classroom that I would say is like on fire, where we have a huge emergency, but we are going to notice a difference in the precision in classroom 2 and the speed that those kids could possibly move in classroom 2. And in classroom 1, we're going to have a little bit more of potentially just like a standardized, like, oh, this is what I do with CVC words, but maybe that's not actually going to hit every single need in that group. So I don't want you to think that if folks are using that classroom 1 setup that they're bad, just that is a little bit less precise. Okay, so let's talk about getting into that precise instruction. And here's the thing, this actually is not necessarily going to be like tons and tons of new assessment. Some of it is going to be more interpreting the data more. Some of it is going to be things that are hopefully fairly informal and quick. And some of it, you're going to say, oh, well, that actually does already exist. We just don't necessarily leverage that. So we're going to talk through the most common things that you would want at every grade level. Okay, so in kindergarten, we have this is like first half. What do we want to know? You're probably learning the alphabet, and you're probably learning phonemic awareness. So we're going to assess that. If you can find me a kindergarten teacher who doesn't do an alphabet assessment, I will pay you $10. So they already have this data. This is not like telling them that they need a new assessment. But what do we need to know in kindergarten? What names and sounds do you know of the alphabet? And can you blend and segment 3 sounds orally? If you can't get up to 3, you can't do CVC words, and then we're reading not a sentence. And then finally, if you can get that bonus of are you forming the letters legibly, that's great, because adding in that handwriting thoughtfulness is how we ensure that we're building towards not just reading, but also writing. Now, the difference in how we might think about this data is about the interpretation here. We aren't thinking, what score do kids have on an alphabet assessment? Wow, that's actually a lot of letters. Hang on, let me see if I can change that. We're thinking about which letters, okay? So when we're talking to a teacher in kindergarten and we're trying to set up some small groups to accelerate alphabet acquisition, I don't care that Jack knows 15. I want to know Jack doesn't know the short vowels, he doesn't know Y, Z, X, and he's confused with B and D. Because that is going to cause quite a difference in instruction. I'm not going to just pull alphabet groups, I'm going to have a short vowel group. And then I'm going to have a B versus D group. And then I'm going to have a group where we do a week and we do X, Y, Z. And that's one of the ways that the flexibility actually flows from the data. If I say, okay, here's my kindergarten classroom, I have 10 kids who need more short vowel work, and then I have 3 kids who need X, Y, and Z, well, actually, you might have a kid who's in both groups and who then gets what they need in this more flexible way than just saying, everybody's either in the stingray group, the dolphin group, or the whale group, and I'm going to try to hit all of the needs of stingrays, even though I know stingray number 3 doesn't actually need that. So when we have this more precise data, we can actually make our groups much better and more efficient. In terms of phonemic awareness, you definitely want to start with continuous sounds, and you do not want to necessarily like over-index on this. We know that kids are still building these skills in the beginning of the year, but we definitely want to notice when children are not keeping up with us in phonemic awareness. One last comment on this, probably obvious, but don't use your screeners for this. I'm sorry, but they don't work for the alphabet. They don't normally assess all the letters. So then how do you know? If you take a look at most screeners that are like a 1-minute assessment or something like that, they're screening just a certain set of letters, which is great for norming. It's great for telling us who's at risk in this group, who's maybe not performing like peers. It's not great for telling you who knows why. So we need to just do a normal alphabet assessment. Okay, and if you're following along and you want to write stuff in your thingy, it's on that packet. Second grade and first grade, we're gonna just kind of treat sort of similarly here. Obviously, there will be differences. What do we need to know here? What kind of words can this kid decode? And have students learned what I taught, or do they need more extra practice? These are 2 highly related but different questions. So we need to understand from something like an informal decoding inventory or a placement test from our phonics curriculum, quick phonics, core phonics, all of these are examples of decoding inventories. We need to know, where are you at on a scope and sequence of phonics skills? This helps us set a starting point, and it helps us know, are you going to be served by whole class phonics work? We can also make decisions about where our whole class work starts if you're in a situation where you walk into a classroom and 70% of the second graders are actually mid-year first grade. We're going to get a lot more bang for our buck if we're allowed to adjust the whole class scope and sequence and the small groups. But we can't just start there because kids grow at different rates. So we want to make sure we also have this continual progress monitoring, ideally weekly, but at a minimum monthly, where we are checking in on phonics skills. That could be something like those UFly weekly checks. I believe Bridge to Reading, right, also has weekly checks, yep. And essentially what we might look at is just, we're asking you to spell words with the phonics patterns you've learned. If your curriculum does not include this, you can create it in like less than a minute. You need 5 to 10 words, spell these words, it's a spelling test. But the kids don't know the words beforehand, and you can send a letter home to mom and dad and say, this is how we're gonna give spelling tests now. No, don't worry about practicing the words at home. If you wanna help, read these kinds of books at home, maybe practice these games at home with spelling, but no, we're not gonna have you practice these exact words. So if we know certain things, then we're gonna do certain things. So for example, if we know in first grade this kid is on red in decoding, we definitely are gonna teach into decoding. There's no doubt that knowing that is good, but maybe we're gonna teach at the wrong place in a scope and sequence. But if we know the kid is red in decoding and they're starting the year working on digraphs, then we're probably gonna teach into decoding and start by teaching into digraphs. And in most cases, we'll continue on with the scope and sequence. But if we know, okay, this kid is starting on red and decoding, they're reading CVC words, but then I gave a quick little assessment on spelling digraphs, because that's what I taught this week, and they only got a 2 out of 5, then I can teach into digraphs and I can give more explicit instruction to solidify that knowledge on a weekly cadence where I see how the child is growing too. So thinking about how if we have these two kind of data points in phonics, we're going to really be able to accelerate the small group experience. Now, once we get into third grade and up, the data is going to start looking a little different. And you're going to, again, notice that a lot of this is able to rely on standardized data. If we're looking at multisyllabic word reading and fluency, we need to answer the question, what kinds of words can this kid decode? Because yes, indeed, you're decoding multisyllabic words. But you need to make sure you're getting a multisyllabic word inventory. A lot of the inventories have this. It's just like the second half. You do want to get into 3-syllable words because approximately 19% of the words in text for third graders are 3 syllables. So don't just get a 2-syllable word assessment. It's not going to give you enough info. And then you want to know, can this child read with sufficient grade level fluency to comprehend text? All that is an ORF. I bet you're doing that. I think it's probably the law. You probably have ORF data on everybody in third grade. So we know if they are reading with sufficient fluency. Ideally, at some point, teachers are also looking into prosody at this age, which means that they're understanding kids' expression and pacing as well. They can use a simple scale like this along with an ORF assessment. They could do this informally when kids are reading any kind of text. I generally would recommend a fiction text to kind of get the best insight, but it's not the make or break that those other two items are. In 4th and 5th grade, you're going to continue to question that ORF because we want to make sure we do notice if anyone is having underlying challenges to read text sufficiently. And we also, of course, want to know about children's understanding of grade level texts. So that can often come from a standardized reading comprehension assessment. Now, some of you might be looking at this and thinking, wow, so we don't care about comprehension till 4th grade? No. Please don't misunderstand me. That's not what I mean. We certainly care if kids can comprehend text orally and written all along the way. But for the service of small group instruction, this is the age where this starts to have more play. But that's highly dependent on your school. It might be that even in 2nd grade, this is really going to be a big part of the conversation. You also might want to dig deeper in comprehension. Oftentimes, this can happen more informally. So these are the types of questions that we might ask about kids' comprehension. Does this child know the meaning of taught words? It's pretty easy. It's a vocab assessment. Can this child infer new word meanings? There's an example of this in the book, talking about how we can ask children certain questions to figure out if they're inferencing that. Can kids retell with sufficient detail and complexity orally, and then in 4th and 5th grade also in writing? We can use protocols like the cubed assessment, which is free, that help us kind of understand, well, what does it look like to score a complex read aloud? Syntax, we might say things like, okay, can this kid understand complex syntax, like during oral instructions? If I give instructions with multi-steps and maybe some weird referential pronouns in there, are they doing it? Or are they confused? That's a good sign that maybe something is confusing them about complex syntax. And inference making. If they have sufficient knowledge and they read a text, are they able to make an inference or not? These are all things that should be covered on any standardized reading comprehension assessment, and teachers can also ask more detailed questions about this within the specific background knowledge context of the curriculum that they're using. But overall, what I want you to think about is if you see something, teach something. If we are in a situation where we notice this kid is never picking up the vocab, or this kid is really seeming totally fine on assessment, but when I actually sit and read with them, I notice that they pause between every single word, take a big deep breath, and seem to struggle with the next word. Let's do something about it. The whole idea of Tier 1 small groups is that we do have the ability to actually prevent reading difficulties if we notice something is going on and we can address it and address that challenge right away. So if we notice something is off, if we have some data that helps us understand that, or if we gather some new data, then let's just do something about it. So I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to take a look at that sheet, steps of assessment. thinking through who starts on each of these in your school. Where would you start students? What assessments do you already have that would cover these? And what details might you need to add in? If you have a certain teacher or classroom and grade level in mind, that's probably the best place to start. Around you. You don't have to do this in silence, although that would be fascinating. All right, let's come back together. Okay, some good questions came up that I'll just share a little bit about, which is a question about cadence. How often are we assessing? I would recommend, first of all, you should have some sort of screening system that is hopefully about 3 times a year. And obviously, every time that happens, there should be kind of a grade level team understanding. How are our kids doing in relation to norms? Who is at risk? What does at risk mean? Who is potentially going to fail to become a reader if we don't do something and we should do something now? Who is actually really going great? And how have all of our efforts translated into these kind of distal assessments? Then you also have this layer of more continuous assessment that might be built into your curriculum, or you might kind of have to build it. I would say somewhere between once a week and once a month, depending on your school. If your school has already been doing once a week, obviously please keep doing that. If once a week is like crazy to react to, if you have a schedule where in the fall you have mostly like 4-day weeks, for example, that might not make sense to like be in constant reaction mode. If you have a cohort of a lot of new teachers, that's kind of a lot to keep track of and to react to. But if you do something every 3 or 4 weeks, that can be a little bit more manageable. Any other questions that came up about the data and logistics? Yes, and we're bringing the microphone to you.
And they do like you to stand if you don't.
Okay, sure. About the frequency of progress monitoring,
Yep.
Does it change based on what the student is working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does. Thank you for bringing that up. So when we're talking about decoding, that's going to be like the shortest time frame for how fast we want to notice and react. If we're talking about children's work in multisyllabic words, we should see their increased use of the strategies to read those words, but it might take longer for them to actually show real proficiency. If we're talking about fluency, sadly, that might take like all year. Fluency can take kind of a while to really impact. Oftentimes in fluency research, we're talking about like a semester long of really like working on that to see a statistical change. So you still want to be monitoring towards that and noticing our kids moving. And I would say that in all 3 of those categories, probably every 3 weeks, you still want to know our kids moving towards our goal. And then finally, in comprehension, that's going to be highly dependent on your content. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but when we're thinking about comprehension, we really have to be tied into our knowledge building work. This is critical because we know that background knowledge is going to deeply impact how kids' comprehension looks. And so we primarily want to react to our curriculum. So if you have the ability to assess reading comprehension within either ELA, science, or social studies content that is ideally set by your curriculum at a certain cadence, that's probably the best way to react to that in addition to your screeners. So it might be a little bit less often. Yeah.
When we're thinking about when students know a word or know a letter, how much are we thinking about their fluency in knowing like how quickly they can do it, or if they can just figure it out? Because we've got kids like sounding out a CVC word and accurately doing it, but do they really know that CVC word, or are we ready to move on to that next step?
I love that question. Okay, so in any skill that we're talking about, you first are going to build accuracy and then you're going to become automatic. So we want to actually see that happen, and we should see that happen. So generally, when we're thinking about are you automatic in something, we set a bar at like 3 seconds or less. So if a child looks at a letter and they cannot tell you that letter's sound for 3 seconds, but then they tell you, they are potentially accurate, but they're not automatic yet. If a child is looking at a word and they have to decode it, they are not automatic with that word. And so we want to see that accuracy build first, and in almost all cases you will. And then you want to see that automaticity grow. And these are going to be different. The way that you react to them, the way that you support them are going to be different. So you want to know where kids are in that sequence, but neither is bad. But I would not say, oh, this child has mastered decoding if they are still decoding, for example. We're waiting for that bar until they're kind of beyond that. Question in the back as well after that one.
Sorry, I also have one. When we're hearing a lot about small groups, we're thinking a lot about it as an intervention, kids who need gaps filled. But what about our kiddos who maybe still deserve small group time, but they're at or above?
Yeah, great question. So when we're thinking about our friends who are on grade level, in any grade where kids are learning to decode words, those children still deserve some sort of small group instruction, because you actually don't know that they are continuing to develop that proficiency if you never listen to them read. So we do need all of those kids to have some exposure to a teacher-run small group where they're getting feedback on their reading. But that experience should look more rigorous than their peers. And that means that we're putting them in more complex decodable texts. So that means that instead of prioritizing just, is it decodable, we're also prioritizing, is it interesting? Is it building their knowledge within a text set? Is it connected to the knowledge I'm building in another time of day? We might also integrate some vocabulary and other support into that in very small ways while still having that target be decoding in context. For children who are beyond that stage and who are, say, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, we may not need a small group for everybody just because we don't have necessarily the time and because we don't know if it will provide tons and tons of benefit. So we might have some small groups for more advanced children that are focused on aspects of comprehension, even on writing, but we also might be operating in a situation where we really need to focus our resources on those children who are below or near grade level, on those kids who are on grade level but need a little extra push and practice to stay there. And in those upper grades, it might not be the case that everybody gets small group instruction. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I know that sounds unfair, but in its unfairness, it is actually equitable because it's getting everybody what they need. We also know, I should note, that beyond the stage of decoding abilities, if children are engaged in meaning-making work independently or with a peer, we actually see a big impact on their reading if they have some time for that. So it's not just teacher work that helps at that stage. So it's okay if sometimes those kids have some time where they're working on, say, writing about reading with a peer. In the back.
All right, this one came from the chat. Would you recommend encoding versus decoding for the continuous assessing? For example, assessing digraphs with short vowel sounds.
Yes, I would recommend encoding because it makes teachers' lives easier. It's a proxy, meaning, it's not perfect. It's not going to tell you exactly about their decoding, but after all, we do want kids to spell right, so it's good to know anyway. So I do recommend doing encoding assessments for that more continuous frequency, but making sure that we do have some word reading assessments built in as well. So say you do encoding every 2 weeks, maybe every 4 or 5 weeks, you also have a decodable passage that you're having kids read through. Okay, we're going to continue on. We are going to jump into some logistics questions about small group, which I think actually some of the questions might have already just been answered. Okay, so let's go into some questions that you might have. So again, remember chapter 3 is really getting into some questions. These are actually not necessarily from chapter 3. These are ones that I thought would be more specifically interesting to you. So I hope that that is true. And then we'll see if there's additional things that we can answer later on. Okay, how do teachers get started? So if you're starting with just one teacher, here's some things that I might recommend. First, we're going to start with the data in that class. Where is kids at? Do I actually need to help this teacher focus on whole group? You would know if you need to focus on whole group if it's like 60% or more of students are off grade level in that area. So if you're focusing on phonics and you're like, woo, wow, this class is like way 2 grade levels below. Or if you're focusing on, say, some sort of aspect of comprehension in an upper grade and you notice like no one in this class knows how to give a retell that has enough details in it. Well, we need to do something as a whole group. Second, then you're going to group the kids as specifically as you can based on the skills in that area. So again, pick a singular focus. If you say, with this class, I'm going to focus on fluency small groups, then your second step, you're not going to have every kid anymore in those groups because you're going to just do one thing at a time. So we might have, okay, there's a class of 30. We said we're going to do fluency. Based on the data, 15 kids could use additional support in fluency. So those are the 15 kids I'm grouping, okay? And then we can layer on additional types of small group as we go. Then, this is maybe a surprise. We're not going to jump into instruction yet. You're going to figure out what are we going to do with those other kids. We're going to spend at least a week with teachers just practicing that. Teach kids the routine. Teach kids the thing that they're going to do. Monitor them. Give them tons of praise for doing that thing well. Help them, work with partners properly and kindly, whatever it might happen to be. Circulate a lot. If you can be in the room with them, that's even better. Get in the room with the teacher and help them feel like that space works. And then, after that feels really solid, focus on trying out one routine per day. So that might mean, okay, I have 2 to 3 groups. Say I have 3 5-kid fluency groups. That means I need at least 3 small groups a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'm gonna try out a single routine each day. So that's maybe phrased weird. Don't try a new routine every day. Just try like one lesson with one group each day and don't overload the number of lessons teachers are trying to do. That means that whole time, teachers are dedicating about 15 minutes a day to small group experiences. So that's one way that you can get started. With those other kids, what are they going to be doing? Ideally, something that's helping them master skills that they're working on. So that might look like structured games. My absolute favorite for this, it's totally free. It's the Florida Center for Reading Research. They have this platform called Reading Center Activities. It's by grade level and then by skill. And there's like 1 billion games. So my favorite thing to do is to say, okay, this class is working on, they actually have some pretty fun like inference generation games. Inference generation. I'm going to print out these games and then we're going to practice learning how to play one game with a partner every day for a week. Next week, we have a 5-game basket at every table. You as a table get to pick which game are we going to play today. Research-supported tech products. There are a few products that have been proven in research to support readers. In general, I would say limit the amount of total time kids are on tech because it is not a replacement for instruction. Current research suggests that children are actually going to receive slightly more benefit from the currently available tech tools that deal with decoding compared to those that deal with comprehension. So we know that EdTech tools can support learning. We do see this, but there's a lot of variation. Some of them definitely don't. And again, those that support decoding actually have stronger outcomes than those that support comprehension. In fact, research finds that those apps that are designed to support comprehension that are too much, they have too much feedback, too much games, too much adaptability, actually have a negative impact on comprehension. So I would rather you could just give them an ebook if you have to have them on a screen. All of this is going to depend on your goals. If your goal is related to what's happening in class, and then you can give them an app that lets them do that, then you're going to get a much better outcome than if they're just doing something random on tech. What else can they do? Decodable text reading, topically connected text reading, or writing about reading. You can also just have a follow-up from the whole group work. But the main thing to remember, keep it brief, keep it flexible, and be reasonable. A 5-year-old, a group of 5-year-olds, if you can get them to be calm, cool, and collected for 10 minutes, that's okay. They're not going to learn something that critical in 10 minutes without an adult even with them. If that means that they're looking at picture books and talking to a partner about what they think the story is, that is okay. If there was research that said it's bad for a new reader to look at a picture book, we would know, okay? It is not bad for them to take a look at a picture book for 10 minutes. If this is, older kids and we can get them in partnerships where they are operating with kindness, again, if it's 10, 15 minutes, that's okay. That can be the goal, especially with newer teachers to small group instruction. And help teachers understand that big idea, 10 minutes is better than no minutes. Meeting with one group a day and doing something is going to be much more impactful than saying, this structure, this thing, it's way too hard for me. I am not using this tool at all. All right. Oh, and here's some coaching moves to get you into that. You might lead the other kids in a specific activity so that everybody else is engaged so that that teacher can focus. You might offer to circulate to do behavior support. You might plan and print out those activities for the other kids. Or you might focus a whole coaching cycle on the other kids instead of focusing the coaching cycle actually on the instruction. As weird as that may sound, it is sometimes a good use of time. I actually helped a coach in Muskegon do this last year, where we did a whole coaching cycle together where all we were focused on was what are the other kids in this second grade class doing? All right, our second question. What does a good lesson look like? Here's what I observe for when I am watching a small group lesson. Is there a clear purpose for this lesson with this group of kids? Can I tell for sure why this group of kids was pulled to do this? Does the teacher use explicit language? Are the materials and routines aligned to the purpose? Are we dedicated to practice and application? Do you hear supportive feedback? And are those other kids engaged in meaningful activities? So let's watch a very quick clip of my teaching, and you tell me if this has some of these, particularly listen for the explicit language. We're going to think about some times letters come together and they say the same sounds separately, but we see them together in words a lot. So sometimes it's important to notice that. So a lot of times we might see two consonants right beside each other. And these ones are still going to say their own sounds, but we're seeing them so much that sometimes it's good to take a look at them together. So if we see S and K at the end of a word together, what sounds will we hear? Yeah, so is that one sound or two sounds? Okay, so with those around you, quickly debriefing what you noticed. In particular, you're thinking about, could I tell why this group was brought together? Is there a purpose? Was this teacher using explicit language? Did it seem like this was going to be materials that were related to said purpose? What did you notice? What are you wondering? Don't worry about that last one. And I'm going to tell you right now that there were issues in that lesson, so don't think it was perfect. Because you can critique me. I'm not going to show you other teachers to critique, but you can critique mine. All right, let's come back together. It wasn't a very long clip. What did you notice and or what are you wondering about how that lesson was purposeful? How was it explicit? How did the materials seem aligned? All right, I will tell you if you don't want to tell me. So, first problem with that lesson was that the teacher was actually not using explicit language. She gave the moment of instruction to the students. What happens when these two letters are right beside each other? She asked instead of telling. That's not explicit language anymore. Was this clearly aligned to a purpose? Yes, I think we could tell. Okay, this was really specific. This was about students who were struggling with blends based on an assessment. And SK and ST are actually two ending sounds, are two of the easiest blends for kids to learn, according to some research. So they were starting from a place where they would hopefully be able to gain some practice. So we do see a purpose. We do see maybe materials related to that purpose, but we are lacking that explicitness. So noticing when we are observing in these small group lessons, we're looking for this really specific language to come up. The whole point of being in that small group is that we're making sure that kids are getting more of what they need. So that's more explicitness, more practice, more application. We might also be wondering how much time we need to devote to small group instruction overall. There's no answer to this. It's going to depend on the needs of the classroom and the ability of kids to work independently, which are literally inversely related. So that sucks. But in general, you might say, you know, in the early grades, we might need at least kind of 1 to 2 small group times a day, groupings a day, that is. And then in the upper grades, we also might need that amount of time, that amount of groups, but it might be longer time to get through the content that's necessary. In the book, I do give some specific suggestions if you really want to look at those, but again, it's really going to depend on what's going on in that classroom. A little bit more about grouping kids. Remember that groups not more than 5. We have clear research that shows that like 5 is a small group, and beyond that, I can't really guarantee that the same impacts are going to happen. We want to be flexible, which might mean kids in more than one group. It might mean we're updating every week. To give you a visual, if we're thinking about, say, a kindergarten classroom, we have these students spread across multiple groups, so we could actually center the needs by having groups of needs rather than groups of kids. So this teacher might say, okay, I have this letter group, this handwriting group, this phonemic blending group. Olivia is actually in all of them. Simon is in letters and handwriting. And this is going to be more efficient overall than if this teacher says, I'm going to have a group that's doing letters, handwriting, and phonemic blending, and we're going to try to hit every single target every single day. That's going to take actually a lot longer and be less effective overall because we're not really focusing in on what those kids need to practice. So this is just one example idea. You don't have to do it exactly like this, but noticing the flexibility and creativity that we could bring into this idea. And last kind of question again that comes up is, when can kids move on to the next thing? You really want to set the bar pretty high with accuracy, probably like 95%. We all make mistakes, but like we really want kids to be accurate. You don't have to wait for full mastery of everything. You don't have to just like say, until you're 95% accurate with T, I'm never going to speak to you about anything other than the letter T. That would be really weird. And instead, you want to focus on distributing practice over time, but also staying kind of in the zone of what those skills are. In terms of decoding, it's also helpful to kind of recognize what order we likely are to see. We're going to see accuracy in isolated decoding. Then we're going to start to see some accuracy in sentences. So say we're looking at consonant digraphs. You're probably going to see some isolated decoding work. Then we're going to kind of be able to start, oh, there's the ch in this sentence, the cat can chat. Then we're going to start to see more, oh, now you're getting automatic when you see CH by itself. Then we're going to start to see that moving into text, and then we're going to start to see that moving into fluency. We are likely to see that accuracy in encoding also moving similar time, but accuracy in conventional spelling of especially long vowels is going to lag, because that is going to require an enormous more amount of practice than anything else. So we don't necessarily need kids to like move in this stair step, but it's helpful to kind of notice where kids are at and how much further you have to go as you're thinking about the types of practice that they need. Okay, with that, we're going to take our second little break. And this is again going to be 10 minutes, so it's 10:44, so we'll come back together at 10:54. And then we're going to get into our last little bit, talking about some routines with our coaching conversation kind of embedded. So we have less time left than I would like, probably more time left than some of you want, but lunch is coming. So we're going to quickly jump back into this same Mentimeter, and hopefully this will work. We'll find out. But I'm going to ask you just to answer that one question that should come up, which is, we're gonna probably only have the time to just quickly talk about one routine, and then we're gonna jump into some coaching scenarios. Which area do you want to do? Alphabet decoding, multisyllabic words fluency, or comprehension, and we will pull something for that area, and we're just gonna kind of talk through one routine, and then, like I said, we're gonna have some time to talk through coaching scenarios, to look through the book, that sort of thing, and I'm gonna do my very best to circulate and talk and answer questions as much as I can. Okay, I think it's pretty obvious that the answer is gonna be comprehension, so that's what we're gonna do. So we can, let me just pull up a different set of slides for us. Alrighty. Okay. Okay, we're gonna come back together, and once the slides have updated for me, we're gonna get into comprehension. Okay, so we're gonna talk just a little bit through, I think it's good, a little bit through comprehension in small groups, and then we're gonna jump into some coaching scenarios. Remember, you're going to revisit all of the routines throughout the year. You have the book, you have other resources in that Padlet, so you will have more access to the routines. You also have a set of videos that are on the book's companion website that have one routine per chapter shown in video form. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them, probably the ones that I'm doing, are like not as sparkly, but you can still use those as examples. They're on the book's companion website, which I think it's like in the inside cover. It will tell you how to get there. All right, let's talk a little bit about comprehension. Let's start with the controversial stuff. Researchers agree you can assess comprehension, true or false. Shout out your answer loud and proud. Can you assess comprehension? Researchers actually disagree on this. One of the researchers who was literally here yesterday told me at another point in time that they don't think that it's possible to ever assess comprehension. Before we move on, just want to quickly note, you can probably see there's like a watermark on these slides. That's because I had to pull them in from something else. So apologies. Try to ignore it. So, researchers don't even agree on this. People don't even agree that you can even assess comprehension. Why? Because it's so dependent on background knowledge. So, true or false, comprehension can be taught as a discrete skill. I hear some people saying it, false. Comprehension cannot be taught as a discrete skill. It isn't the same as decoding. It doesn't move in this linear way where we can say you're here, you're here, you're here, you're here. Instead, there's all these sets of knowledges and also your strategic ability to use this knowledge that's coming into play all at once within an individual text. So that individual text, you might be really great at reading, and then another one you might be very poor at, even if it's considered the same complexity. So this is going to mean that all of this work is more caveated. We have more caveats to our conversation when we start bringing comprehension in. One of the most important things for us to recognize is that when we're talking about comprehension, we need to include knowledge building always. A couple years ago, a meta-analysis on comprehension strategy instruction came out that found there's only an impact of teaching strategies when you're teaching background knowledge too. In other words, we have to be connecting, building kids' knowledge with building their ability to strategically engage with a text. So instead of thinking about things like a small group comprehension based on a text reading, we're going to get a group's level of some way. It might be their Fontes and Pinnell level. It might be their Lexile. And then we're just going to ask a bunch of questions. We want to instead think about how can small groups ensure kids have more access to the grade level text we already plan to read, or to the content and knowledge we're already planning to build. And we're going to teach strategies within these texts and experiences that are designed to overall build knowledge. Our goal is not really retell. Our goal is, are we developing more knowledge and a mental picture of this text and this concept? And in doing so, can we retell? So, when we're doing comprehension in small groups, there's 3 things I want you to really think about. The first is that content is even more critical. Strategies only matter, like I said, when they're attached to this background knowledge, so we've got to be connecting that in. Number 2, this is not everybody. Unlike decoding small groups that everybody needs at least a little bit of, not everybody is going to need support for comprehension in smaller groups. When that whole class work is really robust, just not everybody needs this as their next step. But we still do want to use that data and targeting so that we can really figure out how we can move children's abilities with complex texts on and on. So let's just take 2 minutes to talk with those around you. What is kind of striking to you about this? What reactions are you having to thinking about comprehension in this way? Small group comprehension. What? I'm going to try to get rid of the watermark. Oh, no, that's okay. Someone filled mine up, so thank you. Okay, we're going to come back together. Again, we're just kind of doing this a little briefly to kind of check in. Okay. Hopefully, this is inspiring some interesting thoughts, but again, this is something you might think about across the course of the entire year. So let's talk about just one particular routine very quickly. Hang on, I think that can you refresh again? Sorry, I just updated something because I'm trying to be sensitive to time. That's it. That's the slide I want. Okay. So if we're thinking about helping our readers navigate complex syntax, that might be one of the areas that we are supporting in our small group instruction. First off, yes, syntax does impact reading. Syntax has certainly gotten no do and then too much do and then no do again. And that sort of thing over the eras of, grammar and all of that sort of thing. But it's important to note that things such as having multiple clauses in sentences, having referential pronouns can be very hard for children to navigate. We also know that written syntax is often different than spoken syntax. There's a lot more ambiguity. And so sometimes we might need to increase the support for this when we're in more complex texts, even if a child is perfectly capable in spoken English. And research does find that syntax is actually just as important as vocabulary in terms of children's comprehension outcomes. So what does a routine for this look like? Well, we might do something pretty simple, a little explicit instruction, and then some practice and application with tons of feedback. We start with some data. We don't want to just think, who in my class has problems with syntax? Who has bad grammar? Who, whatever. We might actually ask a very different question. What kinds of challenging syntactic structures are going to show up in the text we're reading in ELA, Science, and Social Studies? And then, who is challenged by that? So that is a much harder question to answer. But what we're doing here is creating this deep coherence between what we're doing in content and what we might then support in small group. Thinking about what makes the text that I need them to read hard, and then who are the children that have difficulties with that exact same thing? Now, how can I support them in accessing those texts by filling in a little bit of that gap, maybe even before we get to that? We want to use that small group time to focus on these challenges to bolster comprehension for those struggling to understand. Then we're going to do our explicit instruction. We can do this through things like think alouds, one of the most powerful tools that we way underutilize. Modeling our metacognition is giving kids an internal script to follow. For example, we might focus on referential pronouns or the connectors in sentences, and we are going to talk through what we see, what we notice, what it makes us think, and how we're then connecting ideas in and across sentences. We might also need to do some grammar. Not everybody's even teaching grammar anymore, but we could. That would be nice. And if you want kind of more resources on this, actually one of the resources you might look towards is something like the Writing Revolution, because this is actually the same undergirding principles as what we need in writing good sentences to understand good sentences. Then we're going to get into some practice. In the comprehension chapter of the book, you want to think about practice more as like we do and application more as like you do, because it's a little bit different than how we might do it with the decoding skills. So we might do something like combining or decomposing a complex sentence. You can just grab one from the text that you're already planning to read. You might do a couple examples together. Again, you're like, isn't that a writing activity? Yeah, because these are all the same. They're undergirded by these same foundational abilities. And then we get into that application piece where kids are on their own. We're going to release them to read that passage with the hard sentences with a partner. You might have them just sit and do it at the table, but you could also release them if you're confident that they're going to be fluent. Have them identify that challenging sentence together and the features. They might map out that sentence together or even decompose it to understand it. But all of this is in the service of saying you're going to be better served, better ready to get into our whole classwork. Or maybe we just did that whole classwork and I knew you were confused and now you get it. So we're taking a pretty different orientation towards thinking about these smaller group experiences in comprehension. In the Padlet, I have an additional strategy that can be helpful. It's called TRAP. It's a paraphrasing strategy, and I connect that into routine 8.3. So in the Padlet, there's a bunch of additional chapter 8 materials that can help you if you want to kind of extend some of this work as well. So that is an example of one of our routines where I'm hoping what you could notice was if you compared that, say, to yesterday when we talked about a decoding routine with minimal pairs. Yep, there's similarities in how we might be thinking about where are students having a challenge and what am I going to do about it. And there's a lot of differences. And so this is what makes small groups both phenomenally impactful and phenomenally challenging. Because when the content of the group changes, the content changes. So in order to be a great teacher of small group instruction, you have to be a great teacher of phonics, a great teacher of writing, a great teacher of reading comprehension, a great teacher of language. And so this is where a lot of this complexity comes in and why we probably want to start with 1 or 2 lower hanging fruits per teacher that we're working with and not try to say, let's figure out how to do all of these things incredibly in small group all at once. Now, in our last bit of time together, we're going to dive into some coaching scenarios and to look at the book. So it's up to you and your table what you want to do. You can take a look at the book and think about how you're going to be working on making this a easier thing for teachers to digest. Finding the commonalities, the most critical routines, even the moves they're already making that you're just going to help them make more precise in a small group. So you can grab the book and do some flipping through and kind of thinking together or on your own. You can also use that booklet page if you want to kind of keep jotting notes to yourself. Or you can jump into our coaching scenarios that are at the back as a way to start thinking about what this would really look like. There's 3. One is about decoding, one is about fluency, and one is about comprehension. You want to consider the circumstances that I describe, thinking about what you would gather or reanalyze about the data, and then how you would adjust the plan, the group, or the goal. I would encourage you to talk these through with the people near you, but you could also just kind of jot your notes. And as you're doing this, I'm going to be walking around and trying to answer the lingering questions that I know you have, and then I'll pull us back together at the end to kind of close us out. So we have about, I'm going to say 13 minutes. to get into this. If you're in the virtual space, this is probably a good time for breakout rooms. And I'm going to be walking around, and you're going to be thinking, reading, and talking. All right, I'm going to grab us all back together and give us a little close out. Okay. All right, we only have a couple minutes left, so I just want to check and see if there is any question that someone is burning to know the answer to. I think based on looking through the questions that I definitely answered some of the ones that you had put this morning. I am sure I didn't answer all of them. And I would welcome you to email me, follow up, etc. Find me at lunch, whatever is possible. And I just want to check and see if there's anything that someone wants to ask right now. We have time, I think, for like 2 questions. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So, with that, closing us out, I want to remind you of a few things. So, this year, if you want to join the Learning Pathway, that will be 3 more sessions virtually. Right, Shelley? Okay. And those will cover the routine chapters of the book. If you do or don't join that, you still have the resource of the book right in front of you. You also are welcome to use that Padlet that I shared. Some folks asked, I will share some of the slides from today into that Padlet. And of course, you are always welcome to contact me. The easiest way is to send a message to me on my website, which is quite literally just my name, juliablindsey.com, and then it comes straight to my email inbox. If you're a social media person, you can also do the same thing on Instagram, which is also at juliablindsey. Whatever floats your boat, it comes to me the same way, so I'm happy to answer questions in any way that they come. Overall, if you're going to take away nothing else from this session and the session yesterday, I hope you're thinking a little differently about, well, what could small group be? Is there more possibility here than maybe I or my teachers have felt in the past because of rigidity or because of expectations that maybe are not what they need to be? How can we figure out what needs are really going on in this class and use data to create the right kinds of instructional moments to move them forward? And ultimately, if we see something, we're going to teach something, because we are going to do our very best to see if we can fill those gaps in as they appear, rather than filling them in later on. So thank you so much for your time and attention the last couple of days. We're going to be dismissing into that other room for lunch, and I have been thinking about lunch, and I'm sure you have too. But someone in the back reminded me, let's not eat too many carbs if we're going to fall asleep in the afternoon. So I guess my lunch mandate is, I guess we all have to eat some protein, some vegetables. Darn, I was planning on going straight for the dessert. Anyway, thanks so much for your time and attention, and I'm sure I'll see some of you soon.